men, armed and uniformed as federal soldiers, came to our house and surrounded it. They inquired for father. Mother told them that he was not at home, but out in the field. Father told her if they came and called for him, to tell them where he was. They made a general search, and then huddled up out in the yard and held a council a few minutes. 5 of them were sent to the field, and while they were gone those at the house were stealing everything they could get their hands on that belonged to father, leaving very few things behind. When the 5 soldiers got to the field, father was not quite done planting. They rode up and asked if his name was Greenwoods. He told them it was. They told him that he was the man they were after, and ordered him to alight over the fence. He asked them if they would not wait until he could finish planting, as he had then but a few short rows, but they told him, with an oath, that they were in a hurry, and kept hurrying him while he was getting his horse ready to start. When they started from the field, my sister asked them what they intended to do with father. They told her, with an oath, that it was uncertain where he would get to before he came back. They brought him to the house and allowed him to eat his dinner. But when he went to dress himself, he could not find a change of clothes, as the soldiers had taken all that he had, and would not even give him his pants and hat. They took him about 3 miles from home, to a man's house by the name of Jones, and pretended to get evidence against him. This was northwest from where we live. They then took him about 3 miles from home, to where a man lived named Peter Skiles, who kept a blacksmith's shop. They stopped and stayed there a while, and searched the house, as Skiles was a southern man. They then took father about half a mile and killed him, and left him lying out in the woods away from the road. No one knew where except those who placed him there. 2 guns were heard after the soldiers left Skiles. This was done on Monday, and his body was not found till the next Monday. We did not know that he was killed until his body was found. When found, he was lying on his back with his overcoat spread on the ground under him. One arm was stretched out one way, and the other stretched out the other way, his hat drawn down over his face, his coat and vest and left glove lying on the ground near him, his right glove on, his left shirt sleeve torn off, and his left hand off and gone. He seemed to have been dragged some 200 or 300 yards before he was shot, as there was but little blood along the trail, and was found as above described near a large tree and among some low bushes. We have heard several times that the Northern Methodist presiding elder, by the name of Ing, sent the men to kill my father. I have given you the substance of what we know of father's death. Signed, Josephine M. Woods, eldest daughter, E. A. Woods, wife, and Mary Louisa, daughter of Reverend Green Woods. Mrs. Woods furnishes the following additional particulars. While eating his dinner, the soldiers asked him if he did not think he ought to have taken the oath, meaning the oath of allegiance which all citizens were required to take. He replied that he would be candid with them, as he tried to be with all men, that it afforded no protection, as only the day before the soldiers had been taking the property and breaking the guns of those who had taken the oath, and he could not see that the oath had profited them any. They hurried him much to finish his dinner. He asked them for his hat, which they refused to give him. He said that he would then wear his old one, and be with his equals, meaning that he was about as near worn out as his hat. Thinking that it might have some good effect upon the soldiers, I reminded him, in their presence, that the meal was out, and asked what I must do, now that he was going away. He replied, "The Lord will provide." And, so far, it is literally true, the Lord has been merciful to give us our daily bread, as we have never had a single meal without bread. When he started, he told me to do the best I could, and seemed to have a presentiment that he would never return. On the way that evening he was stopped at the house of Dr. Boyd. While there he said to Mrs. Boyd, "Tell Mrs. Woods that you saw me here." Mrs. Boyd also heard him tell the soldiers to hurry up and take him wherever they intended to take him, that they would keep him in the hot sun till he would be down sick. They replied that they had a good doctor. He had been very sick only a short time before. It was his custom to hold family worship night and morning, no matter what else was to do. The last day of his life he read for the morning lesson the 37th Psalm. Strenuous efforts have been made to obtain the names of the guilty parties, with but little success. The following statement is the latest and most reliable: a man by the name of Dennis was the pilot, and it is said helped do the shooting. A man named Wells was in the company. We cannot give the first names of either of these men now, but have the promise of them. A young man named Bill Fudge, the son of North Methodists who were once members of the Southern Methodist Church, and another named Harrison Ratliff, it is said, helped commit the murder. To the question, "What evidence have you that Ing, the North Methodist presiding elder, sent the men to commit the murder?" the following reply was furnished: "All the evidence we have that Ing sent the men is, that he was their commander at the time, and it has been told, by those who said they saw it, that father's hand was carried to Ing as proof that they had killed him, and that he still had it in his possession a year or two ago. Respectfully, Josie M. Woods." When Mr. Wood's dead body was found, his left hand was off and gone. Common rumor in the community, and the statement of several reliable gentlemen which may hereafter be given go to confirm this horrible and savage report about the hand. The following account of the affair was published in the St. Louis Christian Advocate, of June 18, 1866, and signed R., of Crawford County, Reverend Greenwood's Mr. Editor, in the letter of your California correspondent. In last week's Advocate, the names of several ministers formerly connected with the St. Louis Conference are mentioned with that of the lamented Greenwoods, who the writer too truly mentions as having been cruelly murdered in the summer of 1862. And, as the writer of the sketch had known the deceased for many years, and was living in an adjoining county at the time the cruel murder was committed, he may be able to furnish some facts relative thereto that would interest his many friends and acquaintances of bygone days. He was at the time, 1862, living at his home, in Dent County, Mo., on a little farm that he was quietly cultivating with his own hands, and had been guilty of no other offense than that of preaching through the county in which he lived every Sunday, and oftener as he found opportunity. And, at the time he was torn from his weeping wife and little ones, he was at home plowing in his field, when suddenly he was surrounded by men wearing the uniform of soldiers, and hailing from Kansas regular jayhawkers. How many broken-hearted wives and mothers, and destitute orphan children, throughout Missouri will have cause to remember these cruel Kansas jayhawkers. The cruel assassination of loved husbands and fathers, the burnt and blasted homesteads, where lonely chimneys only are left to tell the tale of once happy and contented households now scattered and torn by the ruthless storm of war in the wake of these Kansas desperadoes. Truly the fate of Missouri has been hard, and of many it may be said they are strangers in their own land. When informed by them that he must go with them as a prisoner, and probably knowing from the fate of others what he might expect of them, he told them that he had violated no law, that he was a minister of the Methodist Church, South, and that if they intended to kill him, he was not afraid to die. Then taking, as he well believed, a sad and final farewell of his wife and little children, he started with his captors to the town of Salem, as he thought. But, alas! What must have been the agony of the fond wife when she learned, several days afterward, that he had not been taken to Salem at all. Diligent search but confirmed her worst fears. He had been taken about 2 miles from home by the roadside and shot. There the mortal remains of Greenwoods were found, a cold and lifeless corpse with the fatal bullet shot through the head. In contemplating such a scene as this, How the heart saddens and sickens to know that humble and devoted ministers of the cross are put to death for no other cause than that of being ministers of the M.E. Church, South. Is it because that church has been, and still is, in the way of those who profess to have all the piety, loyalty, and religion in the land, that its members and ministers are specially denounced, proscribed, and persecuted, and are the marks of special vengeance for every gang of raiding soldiers that chance to come into Missouri? I am credibly informed that the deceased had never taken any part in the excitement growing out of the war up to that time, that he had never mentioned politics in the pulpit, and had never left home on account of the troubles during all the dark days of '61 and '62. Reverend Greenwoods was a native of Missouri, and through many portions of southern and southeastern Missouri will he be remembered, as his powerful and eloquent voice echoed and died away upon the gently murmuring breezes of his native hills and vales in calling sinners to repentance. But he now sleeps the long sleep of death. That clarion voice is now silent, and will no more be heard on earth proclaiming the good news and glad tidings of salvation which shall be unto all people. But we close, and drop a silent tear to his memory, knowing that he who holdeth the earth in the hollow of his hand, and who numbereth the very hairs of our heads, doth all things well. We have good reason to believe that the religion he so long and faithfully preached to others sustained him in the last trying hour, and in the great day, when all mankind shall stand forth to be judged according to the deeds done in the body, many will rise up and call him blessed. Are thus passed away, by the hand of violence, one of the excellent of the earth, of whom the world was not worthy. A faithful witness for the word of God and the testimony of Jesus, having committed no offense against the laws of God or man, he fell a martyr to the truth, gave his life for a principle and a cause, and offered himself upon the service and sacrifice of his chosen church, and the faith she vindicates in his death, and ascended the thrones of martyrdom, to await, with the martyrs of all ages, the final and glorious triumph of the kingdom of Messiah, in whose service he counted not his life dear unto himself. It is a grand thought that infinite goodness and power has ordained that Christ must reign till he hath put all enemies under his feet. Then cometh the end. Even so, come Lord Jesus. Chapter XX. Revs. Amon Rowe, W. M. Rush, Nathaniel Woolard. Reverend Amon Rowe, the Patriarch of Missouri Methodism. Age, honor and sanctity not exempt from profanation. Mr. Monroe and his wife arrested in Fayette. Mrs. Monroe's trials and witty retorts. How Mr. Monroe escaped the bond. Robbed of everything by Kansas soldiers in 1864. An old man without his mittens, a tower of strength. Our Moses calls the Palmyra Convention. Reverend W. M. Rush, the character of Missouri preachers. A native Missourian settles in Chillicothe in St. Joseph the first year of the war. Caution in public worship. An offensive prayer by Reverend W. C. Toole. General Loan closes the church and deposes Mr. Rush from the ministry by military order. General W. P. Hall vs. Mr. Rush. Hall publishes a letter that denies Mr. Rush protection, and exposes him to assassination. Mr. Rush returns to Chillicothe, his house a stable and his home a desolation. Bold attempt to assassinate him. Correspondence with General Hall goes to St. Louis. Masonic endorsement in charge of the Mound Church. Will hear of him again. Reverend Nathaniel Woolard murdered in Dallas County. Horrible details. Particulars. Reflections. Reverend Andrew Monroe. Even this venerable and honored servant of God, now the Patriarch of Missouri Methodism, was not exempt from trials and troubles during the late war. If a venerable form, erect and majestic, gray locks, long and flowing, lofty mien, benign and saintly, a pure life, long and useful, an honored name, associated with the history of the good and pure in the state, saintly beneficence, sanctified to the highest purposes of the gospel, and a meek and quiet spirit diffused through the toil, and suffering, and labor, and triumphs of half a century in the ministry, could disarm malice, awe the passions into reverence, break the force of prejudice, and shield the person and property, the home and happiness, the liberty and life from vicious violation and petty profanation. Then Andrew Munro had lived in peace unmolested, and his humble house, a freeman's sacred castle, been secure from the tread of vandalism and the hand of plunder. But no altar was too sacred, no home too pure, no name too greatly reverenced, and no life too pure and holy to deter the invader or wither the sacrilegious hand of the spoiler. Meanness was not an incident of the war, and sacrilege was not confined to Mexican guerrillas. Men are naturally mean, and depravity is a fact of human nature. Nor did the war make thieves, and robbers, and murderers, and highwaymen. They were such before, the occasion only was wanting. The sunbeam does not create, it only reveals the motes in the atmosphere. The war furnished the occasion and unveiled the meanness of men, the pure gospel ministry rebuked it, and, naturally enough, provoked its malice and became its victim. Even Andrew Munro, the noble old Roman, could not escape. In the winter of 1862 the Reverend A. Munro was traveling the Fayette Circuit, Missouri Conference M.E. Church, South, and living in the town of Fayette, Howard County. Fayette, like all other towns of importance in the state, was a military post, with one Major Hubbard in command. One day of that winter Mr. Munro and his family were surprised by the appearance of a federal officer and a squad of men entering his humble home, placing him and his wife under arrest, and marching them off to headquarters, for what offense they never knew. The soldiers had arrested many other ladies and gentlemen at the same time, and they had plenty of company when they reached headquarters, amongst whom was the Reverend Drive W. H. Anderson, then president of Central College. When Major Hubbard came in and saw the number of ladies present under arrest, he affected surprise, and said that he had not ordered their arrest, that his subalterns had transcended his orders, and at once informed the ladies that they were released, remarking at the same time that when he wished to see them he would not send for them, but do himself the pleasure of calling at their homes. To which Mrs. Munro promptly replied that she was obliged to him for releasing them so early, but as for seeing him, she had no desire whatever to see him at her house or anywhere else. Many a true and modest woman had occasion during those true blues times to call upon her ready wit to reply to the various impertinent inquiries and demands of a ruffian soldiery, and while Mrs. Munro was surprised at her own courage, her indignation was somewhat appeased when she observed the cutting effect of her retort. Not many days afterward she had occasion again for her ready wit and her Christian fortitude and forbearance. Very early in the morning 5 soldiers called and demanded breakfast. Mr. Munro was at home, but he soon retreated from the front door and called upon his wife to meet the issue. She had no help, and the idea of cooking for so many, and these, too, whom she believed to be her enemies, and who would not hesitate to do her any injury, was very repulsive. But to get rid of them was a difficult question, as many ladies know. By the time she reached the front door and heard their request, her answer was ready. She replied, "My Bible teaches me, if thine enemy hunger, feed him, if he thirst, give him drink. Upon these terms and no other you can get breakfast." To her surprise one of them said, "Madam, we will accept breakfast upon those terms, for I profess to be somewhat acquainted with the Bible." She thought they would turn and go away in a rage, but, on the contrary, she had to turn and get breakfast for her enemies with the best grace she could. It turned out that the spokesman was a local preacher in the Northern Methodist Church, and at the table he remarked to Mrs. Munro that his father was as great a rebel as she was. To which she replied, that it was 1,000 pities that he had so far departed from the ways of his father as to be a degenerate son of an honored sire. Whereupon he said, as a loyal man, I would hate awfully to have to live with such a rebel. General Price could well afford to issue a commission to you, madam. Not many days after this, Mr. Monroe was just ready to mount his horse one morning for a tour of appointments in the country, when a soldier appeared with orders to arrest him and take him to the headquarters of Captain Hale, then commanding the post. The venerable man of God was then marched up to headquarters at the point of the bayonet and required to take the military oath, so called, and give bond, with good security, for his future loyalty to the government, and for the loyalty and good order of his family, the captain remarking that the secesh talk of the women of his family should be stopped. Mr. Monroe replied that he could take the oath if he would then let him go about his master's work, but as for the bond, he must excuse him, as he did not wish to involve his friends and he had but little property. If it was his little property he was after, he might as well go and take charge of that at once and let him go about his business. The captain saw the point and told him to take the oath then and go preach the gospel to every creature. In 1864 Mr. Monroe was living on a farm about 8 miles from Glasgow, in Howard County, when General Price made his famous raid into central Missouri, and took Glasgow amongst other places. The day before the Battle of Glasgow Mr. Monroe was out in a field on his little farm, and his family all away from home except a servant, when a company of Kansas soldiers passing along the road halted, entered the house and robbed it of everything of value they could find. The house was literally pillaged. Mr. Monroe's watch, a fine cloth coat, several pairs of bed blankets, quilts, comforts, and, indeed, everything of any value to them. While thus engaged they saw a young man who lived near approaching the house, all unconscious of what was going on. He was arrested and relieved of all his money, $75. One rough-looking Dutch soldier rode out to the field and accosted the venerable man with an imperative demand for his money. When he found that he had but $2 in the world, he would not take it, but rode back in disgust. A young man, Mr. Monroe's nephew, was met near the house on his uncle's only riding horse, with his only saddle and bridle. The young man was arrested, and the horse and equipments taken to Glasgow and never heard from afterward. Thus, in one single hour, the venerable servant of God stood alone in his field, stripped of everything he had: horse, watch, clothes, blankets, bedding, everything of value. What must have been the feelings of Mrs. Monroe on returning home, after an absence of just 1 hour, to find her house plundered by ruffian soldiery, and her husband beggared. To complete the work, a small squad of soldiers passed along soon afterward, and when they could find nothing else to steal or appropriate, a rough, drunken Dutchman demanded of the old man his woolen mittens, which a lady had but recently given him. He gave them up, and considered himself fortunate to get off so easy. With such petty annoyances, involving privation and suffering, this faithful minister of the gospel, this pioneer and patriarch of Missouri Methodism, passed through the dark and trying scenes of the late Civil War, always hopeful and joyful, and ready to rejoice that he was counted worthy to suffer for a cause of which himself was the finest type, and a principle to maintain which he was willing to go even to prison and to death. To the struggling cause of Christ and his suffering friends he was a tower of strength; to the discomfited and disheartened hosts of the Methodist Israel, he was our Moses. When these calamities were overpast, and the shock of war had expended its fire and force, when the smoke of battle cleared away, and the storm cloud hung low upon the horizon, he surveyed the field, marked the desolation, measured the extent of the wreck, discovered some remains of Zion's former beauty, while others, with indecent haste, sounded her funeral knell, and his voice, like that of a mighty chieftain, was heard over the prairies, along the railroads and in the cities of Missouri, calling the faithful to duty, and rallying the scattered forces for counsel. Upon his call a few ministers and friends convened in Palmyra, in June, 1865, and decreed the life of the church, the resuscitation of her vital powers, the recovery of her lost ground, and the rehabilitation of her distinctive institutions and organs. See the particulars of this Palmyra meeting in its appropriate place. Reverend W. M. Rush. Few men suffered earlier, or more, than the subject of this notice. For many years the name of the Reverend W. M. Rush has been conspicuous on the rolls of Missouri Methodism. Prominent amongst her ablest and truest ministers and foremost in her aggressive evangelism, he has stood through many years of her history. Identified with her early struggles and a faithful laborer upon her broad foundations, he has grown with her growth and strengthened with her strength, until his life and her history are one. Few men have been more conspicuous in her counsels or more distinguished in her fields of labor and conflict. The classmate of Marvin, the senior, and compeer of Caples, the companion of Monroe, and Jordan, and Smith, and Eads, and Johnson, and Redman, and the noble band of Methodist pioneers and patriots, his name will adorn the early annals of the Church, as it will illustrate her later persecutions. Mr. Rush does not care to conceal the fact that he is a native of Missouri. He was converted to God July 8, 1838, and united with the Methodist Church the following August. He was licensed to preach in September, 1841, and was admitted on trial in the conference the following October, at Palmyra, Bishop Morris presiding and W. W. Redman acting as secretary. He has ever been, since that date, an effective itinerant preacher never sustained any other relation to the conference. While traveling the Brunswick district, in 1856, and by the advice of Bishop Pearce, he made arrangements to settle his family in a permanent home, and selected Chillicothe, Livingston County, as the most central and suitable location. He purchased eligible lots, with land adjoining the town, and erected an excellent and commodious residence for his large family. He also improved, furnished, and stocked his adjoining lands to make them productive. Here he settled his family and remained until 1860, when he was appointed to St. Joseph Station, and it became necessary for him to lease out his property in Chillicothe and move his family to St. Joseph, where he was living when the war broke out in 1861. He was deeply impressed with the necessity of caution and prudence in the conduct of his pulpit and public services, as the people to whom he ministered were divided on the questions at issue in the war. He was so careful not to give offense to any that he framed a somewhat formal prayer to be used in public services touching the troubles of the country. It was about as follows: O Thou, who art infinite in wisdom, in goodness, and in power, we pray thee so to direct in the affairs of this country, that the events that are now transpiring may all result for thy glory and the well-being of humanity. We pray that those in authority may have wisdom to direct them in adopting such measures as shall be promotive of the best interests of all the people. To this form of prayer and the sentiments it contained he thought all good citizens of either party could say, Amen. He carefully abstained from every expression that would be offensive to the sectional feelings and views of any of his congregation. In this he was particular, and, he thought, successful. Matters passed on well enough until early in February, 1862, when, after preaching on Sabbath, he called on the Reverend W. C. Toole, a local preacher, to close the service with prayer. He was a strong partisan, and his language in the prayer was extremely bitter toward those in rebellion against the government. Though the congregation was much divided in sentiment, they were at peace among themselves. This prayer was like a firebrand. It excited a good deal of feeling, and people of opposite views thought it much out of place. Upon reflection and consultation with his leading brethren, he determined thereafter to close his own services with prayer, which ministers should always do unless other ministers are present and in the pulpit. He pursued this course but one Sabbath afterward, and then a brother minister, the Reverend S. W. Cope, preached for him, when, during the week following, Brigadier General B.F. Lone, then in command, sent for Mr. Rush to report himself at his headquarters. This he did, and General Lone told him that he had concluded to close his church. Mr. Rush asked him on what account. He replied, because of disloyalty. He was then asked in what respects they were disloyal, and answered that he was informed that a prayer for the government could not be offered in that church without giving offense. The whole matter of the prayer of Mr. Toole and the general character of the service were then explained to General Lone. Mr. Rush was careful to give the reasons for avoiding the introduction of anything savoring of sectional views into the public service, that they could not settle the troubles of the country in the church service, that such an effort would only destroy the peace of the church without in the least benefiting the country, that no prayer savoring of secession had ever been offered in the church or would be tolerated on any account, that the course pursued was the only proper one, and that if all the churches in the land would attend to their appropriate work and let politics alone, it would be far better for the country. To all of this the general replied that the time had come when there must be a distinction in the churches between patriots and traitors. Mr. Rush told him that he could not discriminate in his church on account of political opinions, that he had been in the ministry more than 25 years, and in all that time he had not in a single instance, in prayer or sermon, given utterance to a word or sentence by which his opinions could be known upon any political questions at issue before the country, and that he did not expect in the future to depart from that course. He replied that his mind was made up to close the church. The interview ended, and the church was closed. Soon afterward the general directed a special order to be issued forbidding Mr. Rush from preaching or conducting any kind of religious service within the bounds of his military district. Thus he was silenced, deposed from the ministry, and his ordination credentials revoked by a military satrap. An ambassador for God stricken down by one stroke of a pen to which bayonets imparted power. A messenger of salvation to dying men silenced by the caprice of shoulder straps, and one to whom the risen Messiah by his Spirit said, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature," suspended from his divine commission by the decree of human power. A legate of the skies at the feet of a miserable specimen of human weakness clothed with a little brief authority. Impious presumption. Equaled only by sacrilegious contumely and prurient vanity. After General Lone was dismissed from the military service by Governor Gamble, and General W. P. Hall had succeeded him in command of the district, Mr. Rush addressed a note to General Hall, calling his attention to the order of General Lone, and asking its revocation. Mr. Rush hoped for much consideration at the hands of General Hall from a somewhat intimate acquaintance of 16 years, and the further fact that at the beginning of the troubles their views were in perfect harmony. He had no doubt whatever but that the silencing order of General Lone would at once be revoked. But for once he had mistaken the man. Mr. R. did not then properly estimate the power of the German radicals of the district nor the ambition of General Hall the necessity for him to manufacture a character for extreme loyalty, in doing which he would sacrifice any man or any principle that stood in the way of his personal promotion. General Hall not only refused to revoke the order of General Lone, but published in the St. Joseph Herald, a paper that circulated extensively in the military camps, his letter to Mr. Rush, in which the latter was denounced as a traitor and unworthy the protection of the government. While General Lone, in his personal intercourse with Mr. Rush, was courteous and gentlemanly, General Hall was abusive, ungentlemanly, and tyrannical. His published letter unveiled his true character, while it subjected its helpless victim to suspicion, insult and attempts at brutal assassination. Mr. Rush, in the midst of such trials and dangers, had to give up his charge and return to Chillicothe. Here he found his beautiful home laid waste, the fencing destroyed, the house broken up, horses stabled in 3 rooms on the first floor, and soldiers quartered on the second floor, and the fruit and shrubbery all destroyed. He rented a house for his family, and while the officers of the post always treated him with courtesy and kindness, General Hall's letter had stirred up the common soldiery until his life and the lives of his family were in constant peril. When he discovered the state of things, he wrote General Hall a polite letter, protesting against his published letter, representing the injustice he had done him, and the danger to his person and life caused by it. General Hall returned his letter, and in reply threatened him with a military commission. About the 1st of May, 1863, a bold attempt was made to assassinate him in his own house. His house was first assailed with stones and brickbats, by which the windows were crushed in and the door battered. Pistol shots were then fired through the doors and windows, but a kind providence protected him and his family from serious injury. Upon reporting the facts to the officers in command, protection was promptly furnished, and a guard stationed at the house. But, at the same time, the officers advised him to seek safety elsewhere, that with all their efforts to protect him the assassin's missile might any moment put an end to his life. The week after this occurrence he went to St. Louis to attend the sessions of the Grand Masonic bodies of the state. These grand bodies gave to his ministerial and personal character their highest endorsement, by electing him Grand Chaplain of the Grand Lodge, also of the Grand Chapter, and also of the Convention of High Priests for the state of Missouri. The following is the written order which General Loan directed Colonel King, his subordinate, to issue deposing Mr. Rush from the functions of the ministry in his military district, Headquarters Reg TMSM, Chillicothe, MO, April 24, 1862. Reverend W. M. Rush, Chillicothe, MO, Dear Sir, I am directed by the Brigadier General commanding the district to notify you that it is deemed advisable and necessary to suspend you from the performance of your duties as a minister, or preacher, within this military district, so far as they relate to any of the public services in the church. This will, you observe, include all preaching, the conducting of prayer meetings, and of said suspension you are hereby notified. This, I will add, results from information, deemed entirely reliable, of your disloyal sentiments, and of your very great desire to actively promote the cause of the traitors. I am, Sir, very respectfully, Walter King, Colonel MSM, commanding Chillicothe Post. Mr. Rush had been prohibited by verbal order from preaching in St. Joseph. After he left St. Joseph he preached once in Plattsburgh and once in Chillicothe, whereupon General Loan ordered Colonel King to issue the above order. It was this order which Mr. Rush requested General Hall to revoke. The reply to the letter asking the revocation of General Loan's order, besides being published, was sent as a private note also, and is as follows: Headquarters NWDIS, St. Joseph, MO, February 17, 1863. Reverend W. M. Rush, Chillicothe, MO, My dear Sir, I am in receipt of yours of the 16th inst. I regret that I am not able to comply with your request. According to my views, a religious congregation that cannot endure prayers for its government is disloyal, and a minister that encourages such a congregation in its course is also disloyal. I agree with you, that allegiance and protection are reciprocal. But allegiance requires the citizen to protect the government against all enemies. This you not only refuse to do, but you are not willing to pray for the success of your government over traitors. You claim to be neutral. A citizen has no right to be neutral when enemies are assailing his government. I cannot relieve you from General Loan's order. Very respectfully, Willard P. Hall, Brig Gen Com DG. The following letter was written to General Hall after Mr. Rush had suffered long and much from the effects of his published letter. It explains itself. Chillicothe, MO, April 30, 1863. General W. P. Hall, Dear Sir, some months ago I requested you to relieve me from General Loan's order. This you declined to do, and at the same time, unintentionally, I hope, inflicted upon me a severe injury. Your letter was published in the Herald, and was made the basis of various actions against me. Dr. Hughes, who classified those who were exempt from military duty as loyal and disloyal, enrolled me disloyal. I asked him on what ground he so enrolled me, and told him that I claimed to be as loyal as any man in the government, and that I challenged any man to show the contrary. He told me that he acted upon your letter and did not feel himself authorized to go behind it. He assigned no other reason. Dr. Hughes, you may know, is an extreme radical man. On the 1st of January Captain Moore, Provost Marshal of this post, gave what are called free passes to my Negro woman and girl, and they are now in Kansas. I called on him to know on what ground he based his action. He said he concluded from your letter that I was rebellious, and, therefore, gave the passes without any charge or proof. On the first Monday of April, at our municipal election, my vote was challenged by a lieutenant from St. Joseph, I believe. I asked on what ground. He said my name was on the disloyal list. I told him I did not put it there. Captain Moore said it was put there by order of General Loan. Such are some of the open effects of your published letter, and, as a lawyer, you doubtless know the extent of your legal responsibility for such publication. In your published letter to me you regarded me as disloyal because, as you say, I encouraged a congregation that could not endure prayers for its government. If by the government you mean the country and the Constitution, I beg to inform you that prayers are regularly offered for the country, in the public congregation as well as in my private family, and in private I pray to Him who is infinite in wisdom, in goodness, and in power, that He would so direct in the affairs of the nation, and so control the events that are now transpiring as that all things might yet result for His glory and the well-being of humanity, that He would grant unto our rulers wisdom to adopt such measures as would speedily bring peace and prosperity to our distracted country. If by the government you mean the measures of the administration, I must say that I do not pray for the success of the President's proclamation liberating the slaves of the South. Since these troubles began, I have claimed to be, and I believe I am, as loyal a man as there is in the country, and the Constitution does not permit you, nor any body of men, to prescribe a form of prayer as a test of my loyalty. Since the commencement of these troubles I have been a man of peace. I believed that war would be disastrous to the country, and that if persevered in it would tear down the fair fabric which my fathers helped to rear, and that my children would be left without a country. Sir, I boast not of family, but an ancestral name stands on the Declaration of Independence, and the family has represented the government at Paris and at London. Sir, I can pray for peace, but I cannot pray for war. I never in public or in private prayed for the success of the sword as wielded by any power on earth. What was my offense? I labored to preserve the peace of my congregation. I thought that the church was not the proper arena for the strife of those contending opinions that were convulsing the nation. Why did not Calhoun and Leon of the Presbyterian Church offer such prayers as that offered by W.C. Toole? I will answer. They had too high a sense of religious propriety. Sir, political preaching has sown the seeds that are bringing forth the death of the nation. In more than 20 years in the ministry I have never given utterance to a political sentiment in the pulpit. But now these political preachers are heroes, and I am without a pulpit. You have, also, published to the world that I have no claim upon the government for protection. Thus I am published by you as an outlaw, to be slain by anyone who may be so disposed. And this, notwithstanding I have constantly performed every duty enjoined upon me by the Constitution and laws of the country. On last Wednesday evening, just at dark, my son William, while feeding, was shot at by someone who had secreted himself but a few yards from him. The bullet entered his cap just over his forehead and passed out behind. An inch lower would have killed him. The shot was, no doubt, intended for me. When I wrote to you before, I did it that you might make your own record in my case. You had the opportunity of revoking General Loan's order or of sustaining it. You saw proper to exceed very much the order of General Loan. One word more. I had a financial interest of $1,200 a year in my pulpit so long as my pastoral relation to the church should continue. That relation still continues, but my financial interest in the pulpit has been confiscated, without the authority of law and contrary to a general order issued by the general commanding the department. I am advised by eminent legal counsel that yourself and General Loan are financially responsible to me. General, I have thus written to you candidly, as I think a man of conscious integrity has a right to write to one to whom he is willing to accord equal integrity. If you think that order should still remain in force, so let it be. Your obedient servant, W. M. Rush. To this letter General Hall made the following reply: Headquarters 7th Military Dist of M.O., St. Joseph, M.O., May 2, 1863. Reverend W. M. Rush, Chillicothe, M.O., Sir, I return here with your very extraordinary letter of the 30th ultimate. Notwithstanding the threats contained in it against myself, you surely did not consider what you were writing. My opinion was, and is, that it would do a serious injury to the public for me to rescind General Loan's order with reference to yourself. To threaten an officer for the discharge of his duties, especially in times like these, is a serious offense, which a military commission would promptly punish. I bear you no malice. I have done what I have done in your case because I believed my duty required it. My advice to you is, to make no more threats. Very respectfully, Willard P. Hall, Brig Gen Lemm. Neither explanation nor comment is necessary to the full meaning of this instance of heartless cruelty and wanton oppression. The fact that General Hall's mother-in-law, with whom he lived, was at the time one of the most devoted, pious and prominent members of Mr. Rush's church, only shades the deeper and darker the character of this Missouri Nero. General Hall's skepticism and political ambition made him a ready and a cruel instrument of religious persecution. Without the moral courage to avow his skepticism, and denied the force of character necessary to meet and master opposition, he was just the man to use the authority of shoulder straps to make war upon the institutions of heaven and persecute God's chosen ministers of salvation, and he will feel very uncomfortable in the history he has made. Mr. Rush found it necessary for his own safety to remove his family to St. Louis, and remain there until the close of the war. He found the Mound Church without a pastor, and by the appointment of the presiding elder took charge of that church, and there remained until the quiet and safety that succeeded the war was restored to the state. Mr. Rush will appear again as a victim of the new Constitution, and a noble champion of the liberty of conscience and the supremacy of Christ in his church, which the infidel provisions of that instrument endeavored to strike down. It will be appropriate to close this chapter with an account of the murder of the Reverend Nathaniel Willard, a minister of the Calvinistic, or, as generally termed, Hard-Shell Baptist Church. Elder Willard, or Uncle Natty, as he was familiarly called, was an aged man, in his 72nd year. He had lived a long time in Dallas County, Mo., where he was extensively known and very highly appreciated as a true man, a good neighbor, a kind father, an affectionate husband, a peaceable citizen and an acceptable minister, highly esteemed in love by his denomination for his character and work. He could not, nor did he desire to, take any part in the strifes, excitements, and dangers of the war. He craved the boon of living at home unmolested, and spending the evening of his life in peace in the bosom of his family. He had grown up in the olden times, and under the old regime, when men were outspoken, candid, and fearless in the utterance of their sentiments, and, hence, expressed himself in opposition to the abolitionists, as he called the Union men, and in sympathy with the South. He did not make himself officious or offensive in the expression of his Southern sympathies. He was not a secessionist per se, but a Southern man, deeply impressed with the conviction that the Northern fanatics intended to break up the government and destroy the foundations of Republican liberty. He honestly believed that the success of the South in the struggle would vindicate the wisdom of the fathers of the Republic, and establish firmly and forever the vital principles of civil and religious liberty for which Washington fought and Freeman died. The fact that he entertained such sentiments, however prudent and cautious in their utterance, was sufficient to call forth the vengeful feelings and murderous purposes of the militia of the state. A detailed account of his murder has been furnished by one acquainted with all the facts, in the following language: the murder was committed on the evening of September 1, 1863, that dark and bloody year. A cheerful fire had been made in his sitting room, and he was peacefully enjoying an evening with his family, all unconscious of the approach of danger, not dreaming that his peace would so soon be disturbed, or that his long life was so near its end. While thus in domestic tranquility, and unconscious of danger, a squad of militia scouts rode up to the door, dismounted and walked in without any ceremony. They addressed the old man in a very rough manner, ordering him out of his house, as they wished to speak with him. Father Willard told them that they could talk to him where he was, that he was not going to leave his house. The intention of the militia was evidently to get him out of his house, feign that he made an effort to escape, and shoot him. If this was their intention, they were defeated by the fact that Father Willard supposed that if he left the house, 1 or 2 men would guard him and his family while the rest of them would pillage and then burn the house. When they found that they could not get him out of the house, one of the militia raised his pistol and shot him, the ball taking effect in the face and inflicting a mortal wound. He was removed from the house into the yard and laid on a bed prepared for him, his head resting on the bosom of his heartbroken companion, while his son, a youth of 16, was wiping the blood from his face, and keeping it from his mouth, as it flowed so freely from the wound that he feared it would strangle his father. In the meantime the militia had set the house on fire and committed everything they had to the flames. Having finished their work of destruction, one of them came to where the dying old man was lying, and, finding that he was not yet dead, shot him again, the ball taking effect in his forehead. He instantly expired. The only charge they made against him was that he fed bushwhackers, which was not true. He had fed Southern and Federal soldiers alike when they came to his house, and some of these very men had been recently fed at his table, who now turned upon him and brutally and barbarously murdered him. The men who committed this fatal and foul deed belonged to Captain Morgan Kelly's company of militia. They were never punished, but are now living in Dallas County undisturbed, except by an accusing conscience. Captain Kelly himself professes to be a minister of the gospel, of the Christian, or Campbellite, church, yet he seems to live in peace, with this and many other crimes staring him in the face. The heart sickens at such a recital of cold-blooded murder, and the evidence of savage, not to say inhuman, barbarity that characterized the horrible crime is sufficient to humiliate the whole race of men and send our much vaunted Christian civilization reeling back into the Dark Ages. The shadow on the dial of Ahaz went back 10 degrees. It was a wonderful miracle, but here, in the noon of the 19th century, the shadow on the dial of human progress and Christian civilization has gone down 40 degrees without a miracle, and reaches the grosser, the darker, and the baser passions of our fallen nature, which instigate and then execute deeds of horror at which all Christendom revolts. Chapter XXI. Rev. B. H. Spencer. His character and position as a minister. Order of banishment. Interview with General Merrill. Note to Colonel Kettle. Cause of banishment. Letter to A. C. Stewart, Provost Marshal at Danville. Frank, Manly reply. Second letter to Mr. Stewart, and petition to General McKean. The latter treated with silent contempt. Strong loyal petition endorsed by H. S. Lane, U.S. Senator, and O. P. Morton, Governor of Indiana. Red tape petition returned. Honorable S. C. Wilson, Counsel for the Exiles. General Schofield finally and unconditionally revokes the order of banishment. Indictment for preaching without taking the test oath. Why he declined to take the oath. Prayer for his persecutors. Reverend B. H. Spencer. Neither goodness, kindness, humility, nor usefulness in a minister of the gospel could disarm malice or shield the servant of God from the persecutions of wicked men. It is truly astonishing how many and how diverse the pretexts framed for the arrest, robbery, banishment, imprisonment, or murder of those whose only crime was that they were ministers of the gospel in connection with the M.E. Church, South. Infidelity was never at a loss for expedients, and Antichrist was never without efficient agents. The Reverend B. H. Spencer is almost a native of Missouri, being only 6 months of age when his parents came to Missouri from North Carolina, and has received regular appointments from the Missouri Annual Conference, M.E. Church, South, consecutively since 1843, when he was first admitted on trial. No man has a cleaner and purer record in the church, both in his personal and ministerial character, and few men have occupied so many places of high trust and responsibility. He is one of the old presiding elders, and has often been called to represent his conference on the floor of the General Conference, and has always proved himself to be prudent in counsel, wise in legislation, correct in administration, and eminently useful in the pulpit, distinguished, perhaps, for his scriptural, practical, and forcible expositions of the distinctive doctrines and duties of Bible Christianity. He is zealous, humble, earnest, energetic, and methodistic in all his ministerial work, extensively known and highly esteemed in love for his work's sake all over the state. Long associated with the honored names that will live in the annals of Missouri Methodism, and taking a high rank with them, the sentiments that introduced the Reverend W. M. Rush to these pages, and the reader, may, with but little alteration, introduce Mr. Spencer. Mr. Spencer is a representative man in his character and position in Missouri, and while his persecutions were severe and protracted, his was not an isolated case. He represents in his cruel and wanton exile a large class of Missourians, and especially of Missouri ministers, some of whom will, perhaps, never return to this state. B. T. Kavanaugh, L. M. Lewis, E. K. Miller, B. R. Baxter, and many others are possibly lost to the state forever. They may have gone out for different causes, but the peculiar proscription and persecutions to which ministers in Missouri have been subjected kept them out. Few if any cases of persecution in Missouri present more deliberate meditation, cooler cruelty, and more heartless inhumanity than the one disclosed in the following narrative, made in Mr. Spencer's own quiet, clear and forcible style. His letters to the various military officials, written in exile, and while all the finer sentiments and feelings of his manly, Christian heart were writhing under the cruel injustice he had to bear without the means of vindication or the hope of redress, are worthy the pen of Cranmer, and would have given a higher tone and temper to the moral courage of Lattimore. The reader must, however, measure the man and his persecutors by the following paper, Order of Banishment. Dear Doctor, the first item that I send you is in regard to my banishment, as an act of ecclesiastical persecution. In the town of High Hill, Mo., on the January 16, 1863, I received from the hands of a federal soldier the following order, viz., Headquarters N.E. District, Missouri, Warrenton, Mo., January 13, 1863. Provost Marshal, or Commanding Officer, Danville, M.O., Sir, you will cause the following persons to leave the state of Missouri, within a reasonable time after the receipt of this order, and reside, during the war or until permitted to return, at some place north of Indianapolis, Indiana, and east of Illinois. They will be required to report to you, by letter, once a month, and are not permitted to leave the state by way of St. Louis, but directed to go by Macon City and Hannibal, Missouri. Reverend B. H. Spencer, ************* By command of Brigadier General Merrill. G.O.M. Houston, AAG. The above order was accompanied by the following: Headquarters 67th Regiment EMM, Danville, M.O., January 16, 1863. Rev. B. H. Spencer, Sir, the above is a true copy of General Merrill's order to me. You will obey said order within 6 days from this date. You will report to these headquarters on the day of departure. By order of J. G. Kettle, Colonel Commanding. J. F. Anderson, Adjutant. On the day of receiving this order I went to Warrenton, being General Merrill's headquarters, to see if I could not induce him to revoke it. I found him at the supper table, and unwilling to give me a hearing anywhere else, when the following conversation took place between us: Gen. Merrill, I have received from you an order of banishment from the state, and wish to see you in regard to it. Then what is your name and place of residence? My name is B. H. Spencer, High Hill, M.O. General, in a passion, I can do nothing for you. I replied, it seems that the tongue of slander has reached you concerning me, will you hear evidence in my favor? His reply was peremptorily, no, sir. I inquired, will you then read documents? Answer in same manner, no, sir. He then inquired, does the order allow you to go by St. Louis? I answered, no, sir. Then, said he, see that you don't go that way. I replied, I don't expect to. He said, see that you don't. And then added, you may think yourself very fortunate that you are not hung, and should feel that you are very mercifully dealt by. So the conversation ended, and I returned home and wrote the following note to Colonel Kettle, High Hill, M.O., January 19, 1863. Col.J.G. Kettle, Danville, M.O., Honored Sir, some time ago I promised to marry a couple in this vicinity on tomorrow night, and as it will not be in violation of General Merrill's order, and will furnish me some means with which to carry out that order, will you permit me to do so? I am, very respectfully, B. H. Spencer. The following is his reply: Headquarters 67th Regiment EMM, Danville, M.O., January 19, 1863. Rev. B. H. Spencer, Sir, your request to marry the couple and to preach is granted. I would say that you had better not speak of your banishment in your sermon. Yours, N.C., J. G. Kettle, Colonel. On the 25th of January, 1863, I preached the sermon alluded to, and then, in company with 4 others, made my report to military headquarters at Danville, M.O. But, in consequence of an accident on the railroad, I was permitted to remain with my family until the 28th of that month, when, with a sad heart, I was compelled to leave my distressed wife and 6 little children and go into a land of strangers, and remain in exile for 10 long months. Dr. H. W. Pittman, Reverend D. W. Nowlin, Reverend J. D. Gregory and Reverend W. M. A. Taylor were banished in company with me. We had no trial, either civil or military, nor would they condescend to tell us what were the charges against us, or whether, indeed, there were any. Nor to this day, September 7, 1869 have we found out why it was done, except through private and unofficial sources. The information thus received as to the cause of my banishment was as I expected. I was banished because I was a Southern Methodist preacher. One of the officers was asked by one of my friends, "What are the charges against Spencer?" He answered, "I never heard that there are any, but he is a man of influence, and, if disposed, can do a great deal of harm." Another officer was asked by another friend, and he replied, "The fact that he is a Southern Methodist preacher is all I want to know." There never was a more clear case of ecclesiastical persecution than was my banishment. Certain men sought to produce secession, treason, and rebellion in the M.E. Church, South, by way of showing how they professed to hate these things in the nation. I opposed them, and they became my enemies and had me banished. If any one doubts this, let him attend to the following documents: Ashby's Mills, IND, April 22, 1863. M.R.A.C. Stewart, Provost Marshal, Danville, M.O. Sir, there are reasons which induce me to believe that my case is wholly at the disposal of the officers and Union men of Danville and vicinity. If this be so, I wish to solicit your attention to a few considerations in regard to my case. And, first, I was banished from my home and family without a trial or a knowledge of the charges against me, or who preferred them. Now, sir, is this right? Is there any law, civil or military, that will punish an innocent man? How could the officer who banished me know that I was guilty of any crime without giving me a trial and hearing evidence in the case? Have I ever had such a trial? When? Where? Who were the judge, jury, witnesses pro and con? Where was the prisoner during the trial? And where was my legal counsel to see that justice was done me? With what was I charged, and who were my accusers? 3 months have passed since my banishment, and I am still left in ignorance of why it was done. Was it done merely to gratify official ambition? Or rather, was it not done to gratify the malice of secret enemies? Can the interests of the government be secured or protected, or its dignity increased by such treatment of one of its citizens? Do you say that I am a great rebel, and therefore such treatment is good enough for me? How do you know that I am a rebel at all, much less a great one? Did you learn it from mere rumor, or from a trustworthy witness, sworn to tell the truth before a proper tribunal and in the presence of the accused? In the absence of such evidence, how can an intelligent gentleman make such a charge, if, indeed, any one does make it? If it be stated, or insinuated, that I have been, or am, disloyal or disobedient to the Constitution of the United States, or to any of the laws made in pursuance thereof, or to the Constitution and laws of any state where I have ever lived, or to any military order or edict, this most unjust and oppressive one, banishing me from my home and family not accepted, I deny the allegation and defy proof by competent testimony. Have I not silently borne injustice and oppression long enough? Can you blame me for entering my earnest protest against such treatment? Has it not been said by officers who ought to know, that there are no charges against me, but that I am a man of influence, and, if disposed, could do a great deal of harm? Now, if there are no charges against me, in the name of everything that an American citizen holds dear, why suffer me to be thus persecuted and oppressed without an effort to prevent it? Are you not a sworn officer, sworn to support and defend the Constitution of the United States? And does that Constitution allow such treatment of an American citizen against whom there are no charges? And can you allow it to be done without an effort to prevent it and be innocent? And suppose I have influence, is that a crime? And what reason has anyone to fear that I would use it for evil? Is it proposed to banish men of character and influence from the state for fear they will exert their influence for evil? If not, why send off, and keep off so humble a person as myself? Is this the way an officer should fulfill his oath of office? Was he clothed with authority for this purpose? Is this the only protection I am to expect from the officers of my native state? Is not my banishment, under the circumstances, an unmitigated outrage upon civil and military order, as well as upon my liberties as a citizen? I love and almost venerate the government of the United States as established by our patriotic ancestors. Among earthly institutions I expect and want nothing better. With it I find no fault. My complaint is against certain of its officers for the injustice and oppression with which they treat me. If you were in my place and I in yours, what course would you wish me to pursue? If a peaceable and quiet citizen, such as I have always been, is not free from imprisonment or banishment, who is safe? Has justice forsaken the land? And is there no place where the oppressed may find redress? If there be any place where justice may be had, will you tell me where it is, and how to approach it? I must candidly believe that my banishment was caused by ecclesiastical persecution, that I am banished for an ecclesiastical and not for a political reason. Certain persons sought to produce secession, treason, and rebellion in the ME Church, South, by way of showing how they professed to hate these things in the nation, and I opposed them, because I not only loved union in the nation, but also in the church. Hence they became my enemies, and for this cause alone, as I believe, they secured my banishment. I believe the officer who did it was deceived, and induced to believe me a bad and dangerous man, or surely he would not have acted so hastily and rashly. But you know, and so do all my enemies, that such is not my character. Who would be injured by my return to my family? Can anybody tell? Does anybody fear it? Shall my secret enemies be allowed to continue the gratification of their molly good nighty at my expense under pretense of friendship to the government? Will my continued religious persecution do the government any good? Why, then, suffer its continuance? Why keep a man in exile without just cause, who is in feeble health, with limited means, and a wife and 6 dependent children needing his attention? Will you not then allow me to come home at once? Do not even the instincts of humanity, to say nothing of the higher obligations of justice and official duty, urge compliance with this request? I honestly believe that you and the Union men of your vicinity can get me home if you will, just as easily as to say the word. I may be mistaken, but I honestly believe that my whole case is in your hands, and that I remain in exile or return to my family, just as you will the one or the other. I have reasons for this opinion, and if I am mistaken would like to know it. I wish to say that in all that I have written I have not intentionally used a single word that was disrespectful toward those in authority. In all that I have said, I have aimed to speak plainly, candidly, and earnestly, but also respectfully. I respect you on account of the authority with which you are invested and the government which you represent. But I protest against the way I am treated, and who can blame me for it? And if this protest shall be disregarded now, perhaps it may live and speak in vindication of my character when I am dead, and when the voice of injured justice shall be heard and respected. If you cannot release me, will you tell me who can? And will you answer this at your earliest possible convenience, and let me know what you intend to do in my case? I am, most respectfully, B. H. Spencer. The answer of the Provost Marshal was prompt, frank and manly, and does honor to the head and heart of its author. Unlike every other officer, civil or military, to whom I had applied for information or redress, he did not treat me with silent contempt. He answered. And the answer is important, because it shows clearly that he not only had no hand in the banishment of myself and my companions in exile, but that he also had been kept in ignorance of the intention to do it, as also for the reasons why it was done. Surely there could have been no public charges against us, or proper trial in our case, or the provost marshal in our immediate vicinity could not have thus been kept in ignorance of such an intention till after it was done. It proves, furthermore, that by order of General McKean, it was left to the so-called loyal men of Montgomery County, MO, to say whether we should return or not. And we have the names of those who gave their sworn opinions as to whether it was proper for us to return or not, and could give them, but in mercy we withhold them. And, finally, it proves that our efforts to obtain a revocation of our order of banishment, to be successful, had to be kept to ourselves. Why? Simply because if our secret enemies found it out they would thwart our efforts at the headquarters of the commanding general of the district. But the letter speaks for itself. It is as follows: Office Provost Marshal, Danville, Montgomery Co., MO, April 26, 1863. Rev. B. H. Spencer, Ashby's Mills, IND. Dear Sir, I have just received yours of 22 Dinst, and must acknowledge I am utterly at a loss to comprehend it. I want to say, once for all, to yourself, as also to Dr. Pittman and Judge Nowlin, that I had no hand in your banishment whatever, either as a private citizen or as an officer, that I never had, either directly or indirectly, an intimation that such a thing was contemplated. An order was issued by General McKean, who is commanding general of this district, headquarters at Palmyra, to J.G. Lane, Provost Marshal of Wellsville District, to take the testimony of the loyal men of Montgomery County in relation to the propriety of your return home. Lane was removed from office and his district thrown into mine, and the order was sent to me by General McKean, which I executed by taking the evidence of loyal men, both at High Hill and Montgomery City, as well as Danville. The evidence was sworn to and sent by order of the commanding general to his headquarters. Now, sir, I have given you the facts in regard to everything I have had to do with this case. And, although you protest against any intention to insult or offend in your communication, I must frankly admit that the whole tenor of your letter seems to savor of both. How can you consent, without just cause, to keep one in exile who is in feeble health, and see, is one extract from your letter. Will you not then allow me to come home at once, is another. Now, sir, you must know that I have no direct control of this matter. Why ask me such questions? Why not ask me, as a private citizen, to use my influence to obtain a revocation of the order? The authorities that issued the order of your banishment have never asked, neither have I given, my opinion as to the propriety of the order. Notwithstanding, I consider your letter as invidious, and, as I understand it, full of insinuations against me, yet, under the circumstances, I will allow humanity to step in, discard all feeling that your letter may have excited, and give you the best advice I am capable of. Judge Nowlin, Dr. Pittman and yourself get up a letter, directed to Brig. Gen. McKean, Palmyra, MO, through me as Provost Marshal of Montgomery County. Take humanity for your text, appeal to him through the tears of your wife and helpless children, let government officers alone, agree to report to me once a week in person, if it should be considered necessary, give every assurance that your lips will be sealed in future as to the utterance of treason, directly or indirectly, send a letter to me and I will forward it, with such recommendation as I may deem proper and right, and, if that fails, I am at the end of my row. The success of this thing will very much depend on keeping my advice to yourselves. I may be mistaken, but I believe your liberation may be effected in that way. Give my respects to Judge Nowlin and Dr. Pittman. Yours, N.C., A.C. Stewart, P.R.O.V. Marshal. To the above noble letter I made the following reply: Ashby's Mills, Montgomery Co., Indiana, May 4, 1863. MRAC Stewart, Provost Marshal, Danville, MO, Dear Sir, yours of the April 26th is to hand, has been read and contents noted. And in reply let me say, I regret that you considered my letter in its whole tenor invidious, offensive, and insulting, notwithstanding my protest against such a construction. I knew the task I had undertaken was difficult, for there seems to be something about official position which is always more or less impatient of contradiction. And hence it was reasonable to conclude that this is true of military officers, who feel that it is theirs to command and for others to obey or submit, and not to reason or question. The difficulty was to so employ language as to convey some idea of my righteous indignation at the injustice of my treatment, and which would at the same time be respectful and courteous toward those in authority. And I question very much whether you yourself, in my circumstances, would, if you could, have done better. I was, with only a few days' notice, forced away from the fellowship and pastoral oversight of hundreds of beloved brethren, from a most dependent and afflicted family, from my only means of their support, from the graves of my kindred, and everything of earth that was dear, was denied the privilege of going by St. Louis, where I might have reached the ears of power and have gained a revocation of my order of banishment, with limited means, was compelled to travel a circuitous and expensive route to my place of exile, was denied the privilege of living in the loyal state of Illinois, where I had kindred, and it would have cost me nothing, was denied the sympathy of friends who would have helped me financially, but were afraid, was sent into a land of strangers, under government censure, where, without sympathy, if without money, a man had better be dead, was not allowed to know the charges against me, who were my accusers, or even the semblance of a trial, though I had sought one. Of General Merrill, of General Curtis, of General Halleck, of Governor Gamble, of Attorney General Bates, of Secretary Stanton and of President Lincoln, and had done this, directly and indirectly, through men of commanding influence, whose loyalty was above suspicion, and all this without success, felt, knew, that I was innocent, that there could be no truthful evidence of my being guilty of any crime, knew that I was suffering all this to gratify the molly good nighty of secret enemies who had deceived the military commander and secured my banishment, enemies who, like the midnight assassin, did their work and then slunk away to gloat over the misery they had caused, felt satisfied that I was thus persecuted for an ecclesiastical and not for a political reason, was sure the government could not be benefited by my persecution nor injured by my return to my family, and, finally, became thoroughly convinced that the influence that controlled the action of those who had the power to release me from the binding force of this order, or to keep me in exile, was in or near Danville, and, in a word, was satisfied that I had found out the locality of the authors of my trouble and why they persecuted me, but the identical names of my persecutors I did not know, and hence, in view of the foregoing considerations, I wrote you in the way I did. Now, interpret my letter in the light of my circumstances, and imagine yourself in my condition, and you will be able to comprehend it, and to excuse anything that may seem discourteous or insulting, especially when I assure you nothing of the kind was intended. You have my thanks for your prompt and manly reply to my letter. There are times when I would rather a man would abuse me a little than not answer me at all, and this is one of those times. You are the only officer who had the condescension, kindness, humanity, or whatever else you may please to call it, to answer a single one of my numerous appeals for deliverance from oppression, or for instruction as to where or how I might obtain it. To your praise be this spoken. It affords me much pleasure, also, to learn from yourself that you had no hand in securing my banishment, or knowledge of it until after it occurred. I wish I could think the same of every other citizen of Danville. And now that, in accordance with your wish, I am addressing you as a private citizen, may I ask, and confidently expect, that you will give me the names of my accusers, and the nature of their accusations against me, if there are any, together with the names of those loyal men whose sworn testimony was sent to General McKean in regard to the propriety of allowing me to come home, and the substance of what each one said. As that is the nearest a trial of anything else I have had, should not the accused be allowed to know his accusers, the names of the witnesses and the nature of their testimony against him? You reprehend me very severely for insinuating that you have any direct control of my case. Well, I did not suppose you had authority to revoke the order of banishment, but I did suppose, and do still suppose, that you and your friends of that vicinity can influence General McKean to revoke the order or not, just as you wish, and that you have control of my case in that way. And hence it is that I am so thankful to you, and so much encouraged by your kind offer to use your influence with the commanding officer to set aside this order and permit me to return home. And I am sure if you do promptly and vigorously exert your influence in that direction you are certain of success. Among your items of advice you say, give every assurance that your lips will be sealed in future as to the utterance of treason, directly or indirectly. Now, as this is, to my mind, an intimation that someone, or all three of us, are charged with having been guilty of treasonable utterances, and hence are required to give assurance that we will do so no more, I wish to say for myself that, if such be the intimation, I deny the allegation in toto, for I have neither uttered nor acted treason, nor do I expect to do either in future. And if I am permitted to return, and you can protect me from the tongue of slander, and the secret enemies that with consummate mendacity hound my steps and torture and misrepresent my language and conduct, you will hear nothing of treason, either in utterance or action. But, if that cannot be done, if the tongue of slander and falsehood against me cannot be silenced in any other way than give a fair trial, and make these secret liars, who whisper falsehoods into official ears against those they hate, face the music, and I will vindicate my innocence. Upon that subject I can make no further promises. A mere charge of treason, you know, is no evidence of guilt. The immaculate Son of Man was accused of rebellion, sedition, and treason, with blasphemy, and with being the agent of the prince of devils. Of innocence itself they said, he is not fit to live, away with him, crucify him, crucify him. And if they have done these things in the green tree, what will they not do in the dry? And the same divine authority has said, if any man will live godly in Christ Jesus, he must suffer persecution, and I have made my calculations accordingly. As to your other suggestions, I wish to say that I will herewith transmit to General McKean, through you, a request, or petition, for the revocation of this order in my case, accompanied with a few of the reasons why I make it, which I will thank you to send to him, if you please, together with such remarks and recommendations as you may think proper to make. Please let me hear from you at an early day, and much oblige, most respectfully, B. H. Spencer. The petition was sent to General McKean, through the Provost Marshal of Montgomery County, M.O., together with the best appeal that he could make in our favor. But the only notice he seems to have given it was to treat it with silent contempt. The following is a copy of that petition: Ashby's Mills, IND, May 7, 1863. Brigadier Gen. McKean, Commander, Palmyra, M.O., Dear Sir, will you please to revoke the order of General Merrill, of the January 13, 1863, banishing me from the state of Missouri? A few of the reasons why I ask you to do this are: 1. The order was unjust. The general who issued this order did not know me, was dependent upon others for his information concerning me, and was evidently deceived by my personal enemies, or he never would have issued it. 2d I have never engaged in this rebellion in any way, nor violated any law, civil or military, and, therefore, am not deserving of this punishment. 3d I have a wife and 6 small, helpless children, whose ages range from 2 to 12 years, from whom I have been forcibly separated for more than 3 months, and who very much need my attention, and, therefore, humanity, to say nothing of the higher claims of truth and justice, demands compliance with this request. 4th. If permitted to return, I expect to be, as I have ever been, a law-abiding and good citizen, and, therefore, the government cannot be benefited by my remaining in exile nor injured by my return to my family. 5th. As it is the duty and glory of a government to protect its citizens in the possession of all their legitimate rights, I ask, and hope it will be your pleasure to grant, that I may return to my family in the enjoyment of the untrammeled liberty that I had before my banishment. This petition will be sent to your headquarters by Mr. A.C. Stewart, Provost Marshal, Danville, M.O., accompanied by such remarks and recommendations as he may think proper to make. In the confident expectation that you will grant this just and reasonable request at an early day, I am, most respectfully, B. H. Spencer. After being compelled to remain long enough in exile to form character and make friends amongst strangers, at the end of 9 months some of the most prominent Union men of Indiana, on the August 31, 1863, sent the following petition to the Provost Marshal General of the Department of the Missouri, to Lieutenant Coljo Broadhead, PMG of Missouri, Street Lewis, M.O., or to whomsoever this petition should be addressed. The undersigned petitioners beg leave respectfully to represent to the proper authorities in the state of Missouri, that we are citizens of the United States, residents of the counties of Montgomery and Putnam, in the state of Indiana, that we are now and ever have been loyal and devoted to the government of the United States, that we are supporters of the present administration thereof, and that we are in favor of using all lawful ways and means for suppressing the present rebellion and preserving the Union established by our fathers. We, therefore, cordially endorse all and every one of the measures of the government having these much desired objects in view. We beg leave further to represent that there have been residing in our midst, in our immediate vicinity, for the past 6 or 7 months, 3 individuals, said to be citizens of Montgomery County, in the state of Missouri, and to have been banished from that state by the military authorities there, viz., H. W. Pittman, B. H. Spencer and David W. Nowlin. While we cannot know the causes that led to the banishment of these men, we would state that they came among us under the ban of the government, and we looked upon them as objects of suspicion. They and their conduct have been closely observed and narrowly scrutinized, not to say strictly watched by our party, and we deem it but sheer justice to declare, candidly and emphatically, that after an observation of the length of time indicated above we have seen nothing in these men that in our judgment would require that they longer be kept in exile. They are represented to us as men having families dependent greatly on them for support, and every feeling of humanity is enlisted in their behalf, if the interests of the government do not imperatively require their continuance in exile. With the lights before us, and in view of the facts that these men have resided for the past 6 or 7 months in a population greatly excited on political issues, and among whom sundry disloyal practices have been rife, in which they have had ample opportunities to have partaken if they had been so inclined, and yet our observation has not been sufficient to detect them as aiders or abettors in these disloyal practices, we feel free, therefore, to declare emphatically our convictions that the interests of the government will not be advanced by a longer continuance of their exile, but, on the contrary, we are satisfied that those interests would be promoted by a revocation of the order banishing them from Missouri. We, therefore, in behalf of these exiles, pray the authorities in Missouri who are empowered to do so to revoke the order banishing the said H. W. Pittman, B. H. Spencer and David W. Nowlin from the said state of Missouri, and to release them from further pains and penalties in the premises, and as loyal citizens in duty bound, we will ever pray, and see, signed, John W. Harrison, Dr. H. Labber, Franklin M. McMurray, Dr. George W. Miller, James Knox, J. J. Billingsley, A.D. Billingsley. The undoubted loyalty of these petitioners, and their prominence in social and political circles during Mr. Lincoln's administration, received the following endorsement, which accompanied their petition and formed a part of it. I have known the signers of this paper long and well, they are true and loyal citizens of Indiana, and are all supporters of the administration. They are gentlemen of the highest character, and their statements are entitled to full credit. H. S. Lane, U.S. Senator. The gentlemen who sign the foregoing statement are of undoubted loyalty, and their representations are worthy of credit. O. P. Morton, Government of Indiana. And now, by way of showing how difficult it was for those in prison or exile to obtain a hearing at headquarters, in consequence of official routine, etiquette, or what is technically called red tape, I give the following inscription, which was written on the outside of the above petition before it was returned to the petitioners. It seems first to have come into the hands of some sub-official, who read it and then wrote on it a digest of its contents, as follows: Petition. Citizens of Indiana. P. 102, PMG. 63 that H. W. Pittman, B. H. Spencer and D. W. Nowlin, exiles from Montgomery County, MO, be permitted to return to their families and homes, as they have been closely watched while here and have always conducted themselves as Union men. These petitioners are endorsed by the Governor of Indiana. This sub-official then seems to have sent it to the PM General of the Department, who, without granting or promising to grant the petition, sent it back to Governor Morton, with the following explanation written on it: Headquarters Department of the Missouri, Office of the PMG, St. Louis, MO, September 3, 1863. Respectfully returned to His Excellency, O. P. Morton, Governor of Indiana, with the information that there are no papers on the cases of the persons named in the within petition in this office. Neither does their names appear upon the records. They were probably banished by order of some district commander. By order of Lieutenant Coljo Broadhead. H. H. Hayne, Lieutenant and APMG Department of the Missouri. Upon receiving it, Governor Morton sent it to Senator Lane, who sent it to the petitioners with the following explanation: This paper was today returned to me by Governor Morton, with the endorsements on it. September 7, 1863. H. S. Lane. Just think of it. No trial, no charges, nothing for us or against us, not on the records, no papers in our cases, and yet we in exile and compelled to stay there. But we employed one of Indiana's noblest lawyers, the Honorable Samuel C. Wilson, of Crawfordsville, to take that petition and go with it in person to General Schofield's headquarters. The result was an unconditional revocation of the order of banishment, on the 16th September, 1863, which is as follows: Headquarters Department of the Missouri, St. Louis, MO, September 15, 1863. Special Orders No. 252. I. Dr. H. W. Pittman, David Nowlin, and B. H. Spencer, citizens of Montgomery County, Missouri, heretofore banished to Indiana, to remain there during the war, are permitted to remain in any part of the United States, outside of the limits of this department. They will report their places of residence the first of each month during the war to the Provost Marshal General of this department. By command of Major General Schofield. WMW no, as T adjective T gen L. B. H. Spencer, per Major Dunn. The foregoing facts and documents are a mere tithing of what might be given to the same effect, and go to show most clearly that I was persecuted in various ways, and banished from my helpless family for 10 long months, for no higher and no other crime than that I was a Southern Methodist preacher. Test oath. The following is a mere sample of numerous other indictments against me for preaching without taking the Missouri test oath. Know all men, by these presents, that we, B. H. Spencer, as principal, and Thomas Kemble and A. Bigelow, as securities, are held and firmly bound unto the state of Missouri in the sum of $1,000, the payment whereof, well and truly to be made, we bind ourselves, our heirs, administrators and executors, firmly by these presents. The conditions of the above bond are, that whereas B. H. Spencer has been indicted by the grand jury of Montgomery County for preaching without taking the oath, now, if the said B. H. Spencer shall personally appear before the judge of our circuit court on the first day of the next term of said court to be held at the courthouse in the town of Danville, in and for said county, on the 4th Monday of next May, and answer to said indictment, and not depart therefrom, without the leave of said court, then said bond to be void, otherwise to remain in full force and effect. Witness our signatures this the 18th day of May, A.D. 1866. B. H. Spencer, Thomas Kemble, Abner Bigelow. My refusing to take this oath was not the result of an unwillingness to obey the Constitution and laws of the state of Missouri, for I had already taken the Convention oath, the Halleck oath and the Rosecrans oath, and had sworn fealty to the state as often, and in as many ways as reason, conscience, and loyalty would allow. And hence, when civil authority came between me and my divine master, and virtually said, I will allow you to obey your master if you will swear fealty to me first, I believed it to be wicked thus to surrender the claims of Christ to the demands of Caesar, and resolved, at the hazard of fines and imprisonments, yea, even of life itself, that I would refuse compliance with this unrighteous requirement. I believed they had as much right to say what should be preached as to say who should preach it. Hence I refused, and numerous indictments were the result. Having scarcely commenced the recital of my persecutions as a Southern Methodist preacher, I find this article already too long, and therefore close, with the kindest wishes for all my persecutors, and an earnest prayer for their salvation. I am, truly and fraternally, B. H. Spencer. Chapter XXII. Revs. D. B. Cooper, H. N. What's and Thus. Glanville. Reverend D. B. Cooper attempt made to ride him on a rail defeated by the timely appearance of soldiers. Particulars furnished by Drive N. W. Harris. Reverend H. N. Watts, a native of Missouri. Efforts made to place the old ministers under disability or run them out of the state. Mr. Watts arrested. Silenced. Correspondence with Provost Marshals Reed and Sanderson. Test oath. Reverend Us Glanville, an Englishman by birth. Early life. Peculiar trials. Manner of life as a citizen and a minister. Driven from home in 1863. Returns and obtains written permission to preach. Warned not to fill his appointment on Sabbath, September 20, 1863. Remains at home that night. He is shot through his window, shot a second and third time, and expires praying for his murderers. His eldest son shot and killed the same night. Details furnished by J. H. Ross and Reverend John Monroe. Conclusion. Reverend D. B. Cooper. The following account of an attempt to mob and ride on a rail this humble and worthy minister of the gospel will be perused with interest, as it is furnished by an eyewitness and an intelligent physician, whose statements will not be called in question. But for the fact that he is not a professor of Christianity, and authorizes the use of his name with respectable references, the language would be somewhat toned down and tempered to a milder moral zone. But it is thought best to give the communication as received, as it details some important facts, and throws light upon the animus of others. Pilot Grove, Cooper Co., M.O., April 25, 1869. Reverend P. M. Pinkard, St. Louis, M.O., in the summer of 1863. Reverend D. B. Cooper, now of M.T. Sterling, Kentucky, was on the circuit in Lynn County, M.O. He is one of the purest men I have ever known, and remarkably reticent. I knew him intimately and well, being his physician and a personal friend. He never preached or talked politics, even to his most intimate friends and acquaintances. If there was but one man in Missouri during those wicked years of horror walking humbly before God and acting uprightly toward his fellow men, that man was D. B. Cooper. On Sunday he was preaching in Lockleed, my then residence. Someone whispered to me that some soldiers were outside intending to ride the preacher on a rail. I went out and sure enough there were some half-dozen soldiers who had come up from Brookfield, had gone into a loyal doggery, imbibed freely, and meeting some loyal Methodists, were told that a rebel was preaching. Under the stimuli of bad whiskey and the worse hearts of the God and morality Methodists, they had come to the church with a fence rail intending to commit an outrage upon this gentleman. But man proposes and God disposes. I tried to dissuade them from their purpose, but could not, and went back into church to a lieutenant of Colonel McFerrin's regiment, then stationed in Lockleed, and told him to go to Colonel McFerrin and tell him to send a file of soldiers immediately. I knew McFerrin could be relied on, as he was a Democrat and a gentleman. There was no time to lose, service was nearly over, and neither Mr. Cooper nor his congregation knew anything of the impending outrage. The upper floor of a loyal Methodist's house nearby was full of God's elect to witness the fun. Just before the service closed the braves crowded into the house, and when the congregation was dismissed they, the soldiers, were so situated that they had to leave the house last. When they came out and were about to lift their rail at the side of the house and seize Mr. Cooper, who was yet in ignorance of their designs, they, and all but myself, were surprised to see 2 files of soldiers, with fixed bayonets, marching down on us so as to encompass the entire crowd. As no violence had been done, no arrests were made. The miserable tools of the bad-hearted fanatics slunk away like whipped curs, leaving their pious instigators gnashing their teeth and calling down curses upon McFerrin and myself. I don't think their prayers were ever answered. These maudlin soldiers were not to blame. They were mere tools in the hands of the base-hearted men and women who instigated the outrage. This act is only a type of the general conduct of this people during the war who are now whining for union with you. I am no professor of Christianity, but if such people are Christians, or your union with them would compose a Christian body, I pray the giver of all good to incline my heart to heathenism rather than such a mongrel abomination. I was living in Boonville when they committed the theft of your church there, and know all about it, but you will get the particulars of that honest act from others. I have given you the facts, but have taken no pains, as you see. You may have to rewrite it. You are at liberty to insert it in your book over my signature if you wish. Your friend, N. W. Harris. References were furnished amply sufficient to endorse the veracity of Dr. Harris, had it needed such endorsement. A complete history of those perilous times would unveil many similar acts nipped in the bud, or plotted and projected, but defeated by the timely interference of good men. Many Southern Methodist preachers were threatened with a ride on a rail and a coat of tar and feathers, but the presence of peaceable citizens and the fear of military interference deterred the rabble in most cases from committing the deeds to which they were instigated. The Reverend B. R. Baxter, now in Montana, and the Reverend H. H. Hedgepeth, now in heaven, and others, were forced to leave their work in Andrew, Holt, and adjoining counties in consequence of such threats. Even the persons and lives of all Southern Methodist ministers were in constant peril in that portion of the state until after the Supreme Court of the United States had declared the test oath of the new Constitution unconstitutional. Indeed, not until 1867 was it safe for one of the proscribed and threatened of the M.E. Church, South, to be seen or heard in that part of the state northwest of St. Joseph, as facts hereafter to be narrated will show. But for the present, and for the sake of some little chronological order, events in southeast Missouri claim attention, and, first, Reverend Henry N. Watts. Why were native Missourians in the ministry marked as the special objects of displeasure? Were they sinners above all the men who lived and labored in this goodly state, that such exceptional notice should be taken of them in the administration of pious loyalty? Possibly the discrimination was made upon the ground of personal influence with the people. That they had more influence with the people and stood higher in public estimation than any imported men will not be questioned, but that their influence was used for evil purposes, either political, social or moral, is distinctly denied. That others were envious of their well-earned position, and jealous of their power over the people and consequent ability to control the moral forces of the state for ecclesiastical advancement and distinction, is too true to escape the notice of history, for upon this fact the only rational hypothesis can rest that accounts for the noteworthy preeminence given to the old native Missouri ministers in these persecutions. A man who had been so long and so well known in the Missouri pulpit as the Reverend H. N. Watts could not escape the heavy hand of the persecutor, and the distinction in suffering he had gained in the ministry. Mr. Watts was admitted on trial in the Missouri Conference, M.E. Church, South, at St. Louis, in 1844, and appointed to Ripley Mission, Cape Girardeau District. From that time on he has been a faithful laborer in his master's vineyard, always ready to go where the bishop appointed him without murmuring or gainsaying. At times he has been called to fill the chair of presiding elder, and also to represent his conference in the General Conference. His fidelity to the sacred claims and obligations of the gospel ministry has only been equaled by his loyalty to the church of his choice and his fidelity to her distinctive peculiarities. He was always a man of one work, and never concerned himself particularly about the civil and political affairs of the country. The policy of the church and the saving principles and power of the gospel of grace were more to him than all the things which belong unto Caesar. He thought that there were men enough to attend to Caesar's business, but none too many ministers to keep God's business with men and man's interest in the kingdom of heaven from suffering. Hence he kept himself free from political strifes and attended, with singleness of heart and life, to his holy calling. Thus he was engaged when the war broke out, and up to the summer of 1863 he had suffered very little molestation. He had taken no part in the strife and committed no act of treason against the government, was a peaceable, orderly citizen. In 1863 Mr. Watts was living in Charleston, Mississippi County, MO, and on the 23rd of July was arrested at his house by a squad of soldiers, accompanied by Meeker Thurman, Aaron W., and John Grigsby, and taken to Columbus, KY. He was charged with no crime, and no offense against the laws or peace of the government was ever alleged against him. In vain did he plead the protection of the Constitution of the United States. He was threatened with banishment or imprisonment during the war, unless he would take and subscribe a military oath, which was as repugnant to his feelings as it was oppressive to the rights of conscience. After taking the oath to secure his liberty, and receiving some personal abuse as a minister of the gospel, he was released and permitted to return to his home after an absence of several days. In the spring of 1864, and while Captain Ewing's company of militia were stationed in Charleston, and Lieutenant Jasa Reed was St. Provost Marshal, Mr. Watts was prohibited from preaching the gospel for several weeks by military authority. He continued, however, to travel his circuit and hold religious services. He would read the word of God, sing, pray and exhort the people to flee from the wrath to come and lead peaceable and quiet lives in all godliness and honesty. The following is the correspondence between the Assistant Provost Marshal and Mr. Watts. It will serve to develop the nature of the persecutions he suffered in the light of the official records. Office Assistant Provost Marshal, Charleston, Mo., March 17, 1864. Parson Watts, Sir, you will greatly oblige me, and at the same time not inconvenience yourself, perhaps, by calling at this office on or before the 19th inst, for the purpose of complying with Special Order No. 61, issued by the Provost Marshal General, St. Louis, Mo., March 7, 1864, requiring ministers of the gospel to take the oath of allegiance therein prescribed. Your non-compliance with this notice will be taken as a refusal and will be acted upon accordingly. James A. Reed, 1 St. Lieutenant and St. Provost Marshal. To which Mr. Watts returned the following reply: Charleston, Mo., March 18, 1864. Lieutenant James A. Reed, St. Provost Marshal, Sir, your note of the 17th inst has been received, asking me to appear at your office on or before the 19th inst, to comply with Special Order No. 61, concerning convocations, conferences, councils, assemblies, and C1. I have written to St. Louis for certain information on this and other subjects. I would greatly prefer getting said information before taking action in this matter. 2. I assure you I have not violated said order by attending any synod, council, conference, or any such assembly under any other name, since said order was issued. 3. And as you think preaching would be a violation of said order, I have ceased preaching since I have heard of this order. And a private citizen is not required to take that oath, yourself being judge. 4. As a private individual I have taken the oath of allegiance, a copy of which I have, and, 5. I have not at any time, and do not design violating that order, and with this assurance I hope I shall not be hurried in this matter. Respectfully, H. N. Watts. Mr. Watts addressed the following letter to the Provost Marshal General, St. Louis, Charleston, Mo., March 18, 1864. J. P. Sanderson, Pro Marshal Gen. L., St. Louis, Mo., Dear Sir, Special Order No. 61, from your office, dated the 7th inst, concerning religious convocations, synods, councils, conferences, or assemblies under any other name or title, not being understood as to the extent of its application, will you be kind enough to answer the following inquiries: 1. Under these terms, convocations, synods, and or assemblies under any other name or title, does this include congregational worship, or a congregation met in open church, with free seats for preaching and other public services? And will each one so assembled be required to take the oath prescribed in Special Order No. 61? 2. When an assembly of divines have met to transact the business of the church, and have taken the prescribed oath, are they expected then to oppose secession and treason publicly from the pulpit, or only in private circles? 3. A minister who has within the past year taken the oath of allegiance in another state, but is now traveling in this state, must he again take the oath before he can meet his congregation for public worship? Answers to these inquiries will be gladly received, if you can find time to answer. Your obedient servant, H. N. Watts. The Assistant Provost Marshal at Charleston received the following letter from the Provost Marshal General in answer to the inquiries of Mr. Watts, Headquarters Department of the Missouri, Office of Provost Marshal General. St. Louis, Mo., March 24, 1864. Sir, I am in receipt of your letter of the 21st, enclosing your correspondence with the Reverend Mr. Watts and asking for further instructions, and, Also, I am in receipt of a letter from the same Revelation gentleman, propounding to me the following questions, see questions above. It cannot be necessary, either for your guidance or that of the Revelation gentleman who has propounded these questions to me, to answer them categorically. The order referred to is too plain and distinct to be misunderstood. It applies, as the language used unmistakably indicates, to conferences and all other representative assemblies convened to promote the cause of religion and morality, and not to the ordinary meetings of Christians assembled for the business purposes of a congregation, or benevolent society, or for the worship of God. All the objects of it are answered when its enforcement is confined to the assemblies indicated in it, and, as a matter of course, it forms no part of its purpose or requirements that persons should take the prescribed oath before proceeding to worship their Maker when assembled for that purpose. In case of the attendance at any assemblage of the character indicated in said order of any one who has already taken the oath of allegiance prescribed by the laws of the state for the clergy to legalize marriage, and c. any certificate or evidence of the fact will be sufficient to render him eligible without again taking the prescribed oath. But, while such is the liberal construction of the order number 61, requiring no oath of those divines who have already taken the required oath to enable them to perform all their functions, it is no less the determination of the undersigned to enforce a rigid compliance with the ordinance of the State Convention of June 10, 1862, requiring licensed and ordained preachers of the gospel to take the oath of allegiance therein prescribed before assuming to discharge the duties pertaining to their avocations under the laws of this state. Those who have failed to do so, and who, under the pretense of preaching or worshipping God, meet really for seditious purposes, and, in truth, to desecrate and violate the laws of God and their country, cannot be allowed so to meet or carry on their seditious purposes, and will be held to a strict accountability. I have no inclination, nor do I conceive it to be any part of my duty, to answer the Revelation gentleman's second interrogatory, and thus instruct him in his ministerial duties. My respect for his profession obliges me to presume that he is familiar with the Bible, and needs no such instruction from me. For the information asked in that interrogatory he will, therefore, have to refer to the Bible, whose expounder he professes to be. He need but do so in the proper spirit, and with an earnest desire to be guided by its teachings, to ensure unto him a flood of light as to his duty in the premises. You will furnish the Reverend Mr. Watts with a copy of this letter, and be guided in your own actions by its instructions. Respectfully, J. P. Sanderson, Prov Margen L. Lieutenant J. A. S. A. Reed, Ast. Pro Mar L., Charleston, M.O. The letter of the Provost Marshal General was forwarded to Mr. Watts, through the Assistant Provost Marshal's office at Charleston, accompanied by an order from the latter office requiring him to take the Convention Oath of 62, or cease to preach, and report himself at headquarters, St. Louis. He went to St. Louis, took what was called the Gamble Oath, returned home and resumed his ministerial labors. The correspondence here given is specially valuable for the light it throws upon the spirit and bearing of the military authorities in the direct issue they made with the clergy of the state. Many ministers of the gospel were more oppressed and persecuted, but all of them did not so far yield to military authority on the one hand, nor so sharply contend for the rights of conscience on the other. The special order, No. 61, has a history of itself that will be unveiled in due time, and the true nature of the proscription and persecution under it will be better disclosed in another place. This forcing the conscience of ministers by prescribing test oaths is not a new thing. It is as old as the second great persecution under Domitian, AD 81, and as cruel as the Spanish Inquisition. When state conventions and military commanders in Missouri prepared political test oaths for ministers of the gospel as a class, and ordered all non-juring ministers under disability, The object was not doubtful in the minds of those acquainted with the history of religious persecutions. Another martyred minister of the gospel, the horrible murder of another of God's chosen messengers of salvation, and scene first of the great Missouri tragedy closes, the curtain falls, and both writer and reader may seek temporary relief from what Dr. Summers, in a private note, calls a terrible narrative. When the curtain rises again, it will unveil other scenes in this wonderful histrionic drama, of which those already presented are but the preparation and prelude. The trials and persecutions of the faithful men of God already narrated are sufficient to present the moral and religious phases of the war in Missouri to an intelligent public. Would to God the pall of oblivion could settle down upon the whole history. But if the world still retains its interest in truth, if the Church is still the repository of the testimony of Jesus and the divinely accredited authority for works of righteousness, if the ministers of the gospel are yet responsible for the faith once delivered unto the saints, for the purity of the gospel and the integrity of the kingdom of God on earth, and if history is valuable for the lessons it teaches and the principles it vindicates, then that truth, that righteousness, that faith, that history, all demand the record here made, the lessons taught and the principles vindicated in the trials and sufferings of God's anointed servants during the recent reign of terror. The following shocking narrative of murder must, according to the decision of the publisher, close the first volume. Rev. Thomas Glanville and Son. The subject of this sketch was long and favorably known to the Church in Missouri, and was highly esteemed for his integrity, honesty, and fidelity to principle as well as for his general usefulness as a minister. Others who knew him better have furnished the following account of his life and labors, together with the circumstantial details of the dark and bloody tragedy which closed his career of usefulness on earth, one of the most heartless and cruel assassinations in all the dark history of martyrdom in Missouri. The following sketch has been furnished by an intimate friend of the martyred minister, and will be read with mournful interest. Rev. Thomas Glanville and Son. It was the privilege of the writer to be intimately acquainted with the subjects of this sketch for more than a score of years. Without reference to official documents or private papers, I write mostly from memory, hoping thereby to preserve the precious memory of two worthy men. Rev. Thomas Glanville was born in England about AD 1811, and came to America when about 16 years of age. He was converted to God in early life, and after much mental agony yielded to the conviction that it was his duty to preach. Soon after he began to preach, he joined the St. Louis Conference ME Church, South, and traveled several years. But family afflictions came upon him. His wife died and left him 3 children. He married again and soon afterward located. Time rolled on and ever found him diligent in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, and laboring efficiently as a local preacher. In the fall of 1852 a camp meeting was held in his neighborhood by the lamented leaper, Anthony, and Bond. Bro Glanville's 3 children were at the altar as penitents. All the tenderest sympathies of a father's heart went out after them. How pointed his instructions! And his prayers, oh, how fervent! He told the writer that he had made a vow that if the Lord would accept his 3 children at that meeting, he would rejoin the conference and travel and preach as long as his way seemed open. The Lord did mercifully accept his 3 children, and, true to his vow, he rejoined the conference and remained an acceptable member till the day of his death. When the late Civil War commenced and the flock in southwest Missouri was left for the most part without a shepherd, he and the local preachers of his neighborhood met in council and went out two and held meetings in the most destitute neighborhoods. After a time he was ordered by a militia captain to discontinue his preaching. This grieved him much, but he yielded and remained silent for almost a year. In February, 1863, a meeting was appointed in one of those destitute neighborhoods, which he attended. The fire was shut up in his bones, and in company with a friend he waited on the captain then in command in that vicinity and requested permission to resume his duties as a minister. To his great joy he received a written permission, and the next night he preached a sermon full of joy and comfort. In July or August following 3 men called at his gate one dark night and ordered him to leave the country on pain of death. A few days after he remarked to the writer that he would love to live to see peace restored to the country, and he hoped he would, and then added, "Those fellows may kill me, but I think not. Of one thing I am certain, they can't harm me, death has no terrors for me, and has not had for 15 years. He was a bold and fearless man. Conscious innocence knows no fear, but through the entreaties of friends he left home for a month or more, and it is to be regretted that he made up his mind to return, and did so, saying that he would risk the consequences. He published an appointment for preaching, and a few hours before the time came, 2 militia soldiers waited on him and informed him that he would not be permitted to hold the service. He remained at home that Sabbath, and remarked to a neighbor, "Those fellows will kill me, I believe, but they shall never have it to say that they shot me in the back." That holy Sabbath was his last on earth. When night came on and good men laid them down to peaceful slumbers, his murderers approached his quiet dwelling. A ball discharged from a revolver passed through his window, entered his face and he fell to the floor. To make sure of his victim the murderer raised the window and reaching in shot him through the chest. They then went round, forced the door and 3 men entered. After a few words with Bro Glanville's son, one of them remarked that he had better finish the old man, and so saying shot him again. Thus died the Reverend Thomas Glanville, in the 53rd year of his age. After threatening to burn the house and ordering the family to leave on short time, they rode 2 miles to the residence of Bro Glanville's eldest son, Mr. A. C. Glanville, a man of fine mind and respectable literary attainments, with a meek and quiet spirit, and a member of the M.E. Church, South. They called him up, and, all unconscious of his father's fate and his own danger, he made a light. No sooner was the light made than a ball passed through his window, entered his head and he fell lifeless on the hearth. Thus perished father and son in one night. Since their death little has been said in reference to them, but they still live in the hearts of many friends, and it is well known that they bore the highest type of manhood. Bro Glanville had for many years been an ordained elder in the M.E. Church, South, and while as a preacher he was neither profound nor brilliant, yet he possessed a sound mind, a good understanding in the things of God, was a good sermonizer and improved every year, so that his last days were his best. Peace to his memory. John H. Ross. The Reverend John Monroe, of the St. Louis Conference, one of the oldest ministers in Missouri, furnishes the following sketch of the lamented Glanville. The Reverend Thomas Glanville was born in England, May 15, A.D. 1811. Came to this country about the year 1829 or 1830, and a short time afterward was married to Miss Donnell, of Greene County, Mo. Not long after this event he embraced religion and united with the M.E. Church, and in 1841 was received on trial in the Missouri Conference. In 1843 he was appointed to Buffalo Circuit, where he endured much affliction, both of body and mind. His wife died and he married again, and the next year he located. For a time he traveled under the presiding elder and was readmitted into the St. Louis Conference in 1855, and then traveled regularly until the war came up. He did not cease to preach in his neighborhood. He had an appointment the day he met his awful fate, but dared not attend it, as his avowed enemies were watching his movements. This was Sabbath, September 20, 1863. At night 3 outlaws, guided, no doubt, by another who was not responsible to any military organization, approached his peaceful home and shot him. And what for? No one knows. He, like all good men, was self-denying and made no compromise with sin, wicked men, or devils, reproving sin in all its forms and in all places. He had enemies who threatened him years before, and this was a good time to put their designs into execution. At first he was ordered from home. He went, remained some 3 weeks and returned. Then they compelled him to take an oath and give bond, in which he was bound to stay at home just what he wanted to do. But in a few days after giving bond there came a stripling of a boy, purporting to have orders from a lieutenant of the same family whence all his troubles came, ordering him to again leave home forthwith, and be quick about it. He then, as a law-abiding man, went to Captain Allen, then at Hermitage, for protection to enable him to keep his obligation, and to know how to act under the circumstances. But the captain refused to protect or instruct him, only to tell him that he had better leave quickly, knowing at the same time that such a course would forfeit his bond. He had made up his mind to leave the next morning, but, as stated, 3 armed men came after dark and shot him some 3 or 4 times, and he expired instantly. His last and dying words were, "Lord, have mercy on my enemies." He was buried without a song, not even a prayer was permitted to be offered in behalf of his disconsolate wife and weeping children. But the good man exchanged a world of woe for a land of rest. Thomas Glanville was always known to be a law-abiding man and a peaceable citizen. He often boasted of the privileges he enjoyed under this benign government, and only claimed his rights under its constitution and laws. He was never known to violate any law, abhorred a mean thing and would speak out against it. He strenuously opposed all bushwhacking, stealing, murder, and any and all infringement upon the rights of others. He stood up squarely for the rights of the M.E. Church, South, and contended boldly for the principles of religious liberty. In view of these things it is not difficult to account for his shameful and brutal murder. John Monroe. It is quite a relief to turn away, for a time at least, from the contemplation of such scenes of barbarity and more than savage cruelty as the history of the terrible past presents to our faith and philosophy. 3 long chapters, prepared for this volume, are laid over for the second, by the decree of the publisher, to prevent the enlargement of the present volume to an improper size. By it the next volume will be enriched beyond measure. What is lost to this will be gained for that, and neither the work, as a whole, nor the reader will be damaged. The deferred chapters contain an account of the Rosecrans Oath, in Special Order No. 61, of March 7, 1864, and its designs upon the common laws and facts of religious liberty, the persecutions, trials, banishment, etc., of the Reverend Doctors McFeeters and Ferris, of the Presbyterian Church, the Reverend Tyson Dines, of the M.E. Church, South, the long imprisonment and peculiar sufferings of the Reverend Dr. McAnally, the effort to crush or confiscate the publishing house at St. Louis, and its preservation and security by the agent, the Reverend P. M. Pinkard, and a chapter of Martyrs, detailing with careful minuteness the cold-blooded murder of the Reverend John L. Wood, the Reverend George L. Sexton and the Reverend Edwin Robinson. The history of the indictments, trials, imprisonment, and persecutions of ministers under the test oath of the new Constitution will form a prominent and extensive feature of the second volume, with due attention to the particulars of the murder of the Reverend Samuel S. Headley and others, which will invest the work with thrilling interest. The future historian will assign to these names a conspicuous place upon the long roll of martyrs, and the future church will reap a rich harvest of souls, with multiplied agencies and resources, from the blood they shed for the testimony of Jesus and the Word of God. They lived unknown till persecution dragged them into fame, and chased them up to heaven. Their ashes flew, no marble tells us whither. With their names no bard embalms and sanctifies his song, and history, so warm on meaner themes, is cold on this. She execrates, indeed, the tyranny that doomed them to the fire, but gives the glorious sufferers little praise. End of volume. I transcriber's notes silently corrected obvious typographical errors and variations in spelling. Retained archaic, non-standard, and uncertain spellings as printed. End of the Project Gutenberg ebook Martyrdom in Missouri, Volume 1, of 2. Updated editions will replace the previous one. The old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from print editions not protected by U.S. copyright law means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works, so the Foundation, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules, set forth in the General Terms of Use part of this license, apply to copying and distributing Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark concept and trademark. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark, and may not be used if you charge for an ebook, except by following the terms of the trademark license, including paying royalties for use of the Project Gutenberg trademark. If you do not charge anything for copies of this ebook, complying with the trademark license is very easy. You may use this ebook for nearly any purpose such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances, and research. Project Gutenberg ebooks may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything in the United States with ebooks not protected by U.S. copyright law. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start, full license. The full Project Gutenberg license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark mission of promoting the free distribution of electronic works, by using or distributing this work, or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg. You agree to comply with all the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark license available with this file or online at www.gutenberg.org/license. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistributing Project Gutenberg Trademark Electronic Works 1.a. By reading or using any part of this Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work, you indicate that you have read, understand, agree to and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark/copyright, agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or destroy all copies of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works in your possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy of or access to a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work and you do not agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement, you may obtain a refund from the person or entity to whom you paid the fee as set forth in paragraph 1.e.8. 1.b. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark. It may only be used on or associated in any way with an electronic work by people who agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement. There are a few things that you can do with most Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works even without complying with the full terms of this agreement. See paragraph 1.c below. There are a lot of things you can do with Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works if you follow the terms of this agreement and help preserve free future access to Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works. See paragraph 1.e below. 1.c. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the Foundation or PGLOF, owns a compilation copyright in the collection of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works. Nearly all the individual works in the collection are in the public domain in the United States. If an individual work is unprotected by copyright law in the United States and you are located in the United States, we do not claim a right to prevent you from copying, distributing, performing, displaying, or creating derivative works based on the work as long as all references to Project Gutenberg are removed. Of course, We hope that you will support the Project Gutenberg trademark mission of promoting free access to electronic works by freely sharing Project Gutenberg trademark works in compliance with the terms of this agreement for keeping the Project Gutenberg trademark name associated with the work. You can easily comply with the terms of this agreement by keeping this work in the same format with its attached full Project Gutenberg trademark license when you share it without charge with others. 1.d. The copyright laws of the place where you are located also govern what you can do with this work. Copyright laws in most countries are in a constant state of change. If you are outside the United States, check the laws of your country in addition to the terms of this agreement before downloading, copying, displaying, performing, distributing or creating derivative works based on this work or any other Project Gutenberg trademark work. The Foundation makes no representations concerning the copyright status of any work in any country other than the United States. 1.e Unless you have removed all references to Project Gutenberg, 1.e.1. The following sentence, with active links to, or other immediate access to, the full Project Gutenberg trademark license must appear prominently whenever any copy of a Project Gutenberg trademark work, any work on which the phrase Project Gutenberg appears, or with which the phrase Project Gutenberg is associated, is accessed, displayed, performed, viewed, copied or distributed. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this ebook. 1.e.2. If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work is derived from texts not protected by U.S. copyright law, does not contain a notice indicating that it is posted with permission of the copyright holder, the work can be copied and distributed to anyone in the United States without paying any fees or charges. If you are redistributing or providing access to a work with the phrase Project Gutenberg associated with or appearing on the work, you must comply either with the requirements of paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 or obtain permission for the use of the work and the Project Gutenberg trademark as set forth in paragraphs 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.3. If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work is posted with the permission of the copyright holder, your use and distribution must comply with both paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 and any additional terms imposed by the copyright holder. Additional terms will be linked to the Project Gutenberg trademark license for all works posted with the permission of the copyright holder found at the beginning of this work. 1.e.4. Do not unlink or detach or remove the full Project Gutenberg trademark license terms from this work, or any files containing a part of this work or any other work associated with Project Gutenberg trademark. 1.e.5. Do not copy, display, perform, distribute or redistribute this electronic work, or any part of this electronic work, without prominently displaying the sentence set forth in paragraph 1.e.1 with active links or immediate access to the full terms of the Project Gutenberg trademark license. 1.e.6. You may convert to and distribute this work in any binary, compressed, marked up, non-proprietary or proprietary form, including any word processing or hypertext form. However, if you provide access to or distribute copies of a Project Gutenberg trademark work in a format other than plain vanilla ASCII or other format used in the official version posted on the official Project Gutenberg trademark website, www.gutenberg.org, you must, at no additional cost, fee, or expense to the user, provide a copy, a means of exporting a copy, or a means of obtaining a copy upon request, of the work in its original plain vanilla ASCII or other form. Any alternate format must include the full Project Gutenberg trademark license as specified in paragraph 1.e.1. 1.e.7. Do not charge a fee for access to, viewing, displaying, performing, copying or distributing any Project Gutenberg trademark works unless you comply with paragraph 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.8. You may charge a reasonable fee for copies of or providing access to or distributing Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works provided that, you pay a royalty fee of 20% of the gross profits you derive from the use of Project Gutenberg trademark works calculated using the method you already use to calculate your applicable taxes. The fee is owed to the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark, but he has agreed to donate royalties under this paragraph to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Royalty payments must be paid within 60 days following each date on which you prepare, or are legally required to prepare, your periodic tax returns. Royalty payments should be clearly marked as such and sent to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation at the address specified in Section 4, Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. You provide a full refund of any money paid by a user who notifies you in writing, or by email, within 30 days of receipt that he does not agree to the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark license. You must require such a user to return or destroy all copies of the works possessed in a physical medium and discontinue all use of and all access to other copies of Project Gutenberg trademark works. You provide, in accordance with paragraph 1.f.3, a full refund of any money paid for a work or a replacement copy, if a defect in the electronic work is discovered and reported to you within 90 days of receipt of the work. You comply with all other terms of this agreement for free distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark works. 1.e.9. If you wish to distribute a Project Gutenberg trademark